Trump is taking his own government to court. The president, two of his eldest sons, and the Trump Organization have filed a lawsuit against the IRS and Treasury Department. He is seeking $10 billion in damages over allegedly leaking confidential tax returns. The legal action was filed at a federal court in Miami. The complaint claims that government agencies did not take adequate steps to prevent a former Internal Revenue Service contractor from leaking tax returns. According to court documents, Trump is suing in a personal capacity rather than as a president. The case centers on former IRS contractor Charles E. Littlejohn. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison in 2024 after pleading guilty to leaking Trump's tax records to the New York Times. Trump's tax returns were the focus of speculation during his first term in office. Back in 2020, the New York Times reported that Trump paid just $750 in federal income taxes in 2016 and 2017.
All right, guys, welcome to Dr. John Podcast once again. Trump's financial empire is under coordinated assault from federal agencies, state courts, and major banks, with the Treasury, IRS, and New York courts all moving against him simultaneously, imposing sweeping restrictions and demanding over $500 million. Trump has responded by suing the IRS and Treasury for $10 billion, a desperate attempt to intimidate investigators as the walls close in on his business foundation. The irony of Trump's position is almost too rich to ignore, because here is a man who built his entire political identity on the claim that he would drain the swamp and hold the powerful accountable, now finding himself on the receiving end of the most aggressive financial scrutiny any American president has ever faced. The Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network has filed 34 suspicious activity reports on approximately $284 million in Trump Organization offshore wire transfers, a figure that represents not just money but potentially criminal conduct.
Trump dismissed the report as fake and said the information was illegally obtained. Littlejohn also admitted to stealing tax records of thousands of wealthy individuals, including Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Now, the filed lawsuit says that the IRS and the U.S. Treasury Department had a duty to safeguard and protect their confidential tax returns. It claims that the leak caused financial harm, public embarrassment, unfairly tarnished their business reputations, portrayed them in a false light, and negatively affected public standing of President Trump, his sons, as well as his organization. This is not the first time that President Trump has taken legal action against the federal government that he oversees. The New York Times reports that Trump had sought $230 million in damages from the U.S. Department of Justice. The claim relates to investigations into his handling of classified documents and efforts to overturn the result of the 2020 election. Since returning to office, President Trump has filed multiple lawsuits, often against media organizations demanding billions of dollars. He sued the BBC last year over edits to a January 6th speech clip. He is also suing the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch over reporting linked to Jeffrey Epstein. Other lawsuits, including a $5 billion case against JP Morgan Chase, and its CEO.
These are not vague suspicions or political accusations. They are detailed, specific, professional reports created by trained financial analysts who have identified patterns that they consider classic money laundering techniques. The suspicious activity reports paint a picture of deliberate and systematic efforts to move money through complex structures designed to obscure its origin and destination. The reports describe transfers to Cayman Islands shell companies, entities registered in Dubai, and other offshore jurisdictions that are known for their financial secrecy and lack of transparency. The timing of these transfers is particularly damning because they occurred immediately after major legal judgments, suggesting that Trump and his organization were attempting to move assets out of reach of courts that had just imposed hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties.
A crushing blow for Trump at the Supreme Court. In a major loss for the president, the Supreme Court today shutting down his efforts to meddle in the upcoming election. Two of the conservative justices joining the liberal justices to allow states to continue counting mail-in ballots that are postmarked by Election Day. Trump did not take it well.
The mail-in ballot ruling, which was a little bit surprising, gives people more time to vote illegally, let's say. I think it was very detrimental to honest elections.
Now, of course, there's no evidence of widespread fraud when it comes to mail-in ballots. And frankly, sometimes it's frustrating to even have to say it that way. They've looked and looked and looked. There hasn't been fraud on a widespread basis in mail-in ballots. But Trump has voted by mail the last time he voted, frankly, in Florida back in March for a special election. It's not the only time either. And this is not the only defeat that Trump suffered at the Supreme Court today. The justices declined to hear Trump's appeal in the civil case, which found him liable for the sexual abuse and defamation of writer E. Jean Carroll, which means that Trump still has to pay Carroll $5 million in damages. Now, those were two stinging defeats. So Trump today did cling to one victory, which does give him even more power.
This is exactly the kind of behavior that prosecutors look for when building money laundering cases: the deliberate concealment of assets and the use of complex financial structures to evade detection. The amounts involved are staggering, with the suspicious activity reports documenting a pattern of transfers that together total almost $300 million. That's not a rounding error, that's not an accounting discrepancy, that's a massive flow of money that Treasury investigators have identified as potentially illegal. The reports note that the structures used for these transfers were designed to stay just below automatic reporting thresholds, a technique known as structuring that is itself a federal crime. When someone deliberately breaks up financial transactions to avoid triggering reporting requirements,
the Slaughter case was the big case today. That was really a big case. It gives me the right, and not me, it gives a president the right to do what the president should have the right to do. And it's very interesting. It's a big ruling.
So at the heart of this ruling is Trump's firing of Rebecca Slaughter without cause. She's one of the only Democrats on the Federal Trade Commission. And then she sued Trump. Now, Trump won, which is something he is not going to let anyone forget. He said today's historic Slaughter decision by the Supreme Court is the greatest increase in presidential power in the past 100 years, such a monumental ruling at such an important time. Now, Rebecca Slaughter is going to be our guest in just a moment. But as Slaughter will tell us tonight, the FTC is supposed to be an independent agency that protects Americans against harmful business practices. And Trump did not seem to want Democrats on that commission, so he fired Slaughter along with another Democrat. Meanwhile, the titans of the business world and the media world, the very people that the FTC is supposed to be policing to make sure that they are protecting consumers' best interests, well, the CEOs of Apple, Meta, Alphabet were all front and center at Trump's inauguration. Mark Zuckerberg attended the UFC fights on Trump's birthday earlier this month. Tim Cook went to China with Trump, and their companies donated to his ballroom.
It's a sign that they have something to hide. And when those transactions are moving money to offshore shell companies in the wake of civil fraud judgments, the inference of criminal conduct becomes overwhelming. The IRS has taken these suspicious activity reports extremely seriously, opening formal criminal investigation cases under grand jury authority. This is not a civil tax dispute or an administrative matter. This is a criminal investigation with the power to compel testimony under oath, to subpoena documents, and to build a case for federal prosecution. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division is one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the federal government. And when they open a grand jury investigation, it means they have probable cause to believe that crimes have been committed and that they are actively building a case that could result in criminal charges. The subpoenas are already going out, targeting Trump Organization records, accountants, advisors, and anyone else who might have knowledge of the suspicious transfers. The New York court situation adds another layer of pressure to Trump's already desperate financial position. The civil fraud judgment against Trump and his company exceeds $450 million, a figure that alone would be crushing for most businesses. But the courts didn't stop at imposing a fine. They also imposed structural controls on Trump's ability to operate, appointing monitors to oversee the Trump Organization's finances, and requiring court approval for major financial decisions. This means that Trump cannot simply move money around to try to satisfy the judgment or protect his assets. Every significant transaction must be disclosed and approved, and the court-appointed monitor has real authority to report suspicious activity to the authorities. The monitor's role is particularly dangerous for Trump because it provides continuous, real-time oversight of his financial operations that cannot be evaded or manipulated. Every transfer, every restructuring, every major financial decision is documented and reviewed, and if the monitor identifies something suspicious, they have a direct line to the court and to law enforcement. This is the kind of oversight that makes it nearly impossible for Trump to hide assets or engage in the kind of financial maneuvering that the suspicious activity reports suggest he's been doing for years. The Monitor is essentially a financial watchdog with teeth, and they are watching everything Trump does with his money. The banks have also turned against Trump in a way that is quietly devastating for his financial operations. Major financial institutions have closed his accounts, refused to do business with him, and cut off his access to the credit and banking services that any large business requires to operate. This is not a minor inconvenience. It's a fundamental threat to Trump's ability to conduct business, because without major banks, he has to rely on smaller lenders, foreign entities, and private equity sources that are more expensive, more complicated, and more likely to have their own legal problems. The bank's decision to cut ties with Trump reflects their assessment of the legal risks involved in doing business with him, and it's a signal that his financial situation has become so toxic that even profit-driven institutions are unwilling to take the risk. The convergence of these pressures is creating something that looks like a financial vice, tightening around Trump from every direction and leaving him with fewer and fewer options. The Treasury Department is investigating his transfers, the IRS is building criminal cases, the courts are restricting his operations, the banks are cutting him off, and his own legal strategy of suing the investigators is not stopping any of it. In fact, the lawsuit may be making things worse, because suing the agencies that are investigating you looks like obstruction of justice, and it gives prosecutors additional evidence of consciousness of guilt. If Trump were innocent, the reasoning goes, why would he be trying so desperately to stop the investigations? The political implications of this financial meltdown are almost too large to grasp, because Trump is not just a businessman facing legal problems. He is the sitting president of the United States, and the investigations into his finances are occurring while he is in office and trying to govern. Every day that Trump spends dealing with his financial problems is a day that he is not focused on the duties of the presidency, and every revelation about his financial conduct is a blow to his credibility and his claim to be a successful businessman who can manage the national economy. The contrast between the image Trump projects and the reality of his financial situation is becoming impossible to ignore, and that contrast is eroding his political support in ways that are difficult to measure but impossible to deny. The suspicious activity reports are particularly damaging because they are official government documents that describe specific transactions in detail, not political accusations from opponents or media speculation. These are reports created by professional financial analysts whose job is to identify patterns of criminal conduct, and they have concluded that Trump Organization transfers display classic money laundering characteristics. The reports are now in the hands of IRS criminal investigators, who are using them as the basis for grand jury investigations that could lead to federal prosecution. This is not a political witch hunt, it's a law enforcement process that is following the evidence wherever it leads, and right now, it's leading directly to Trump's financial operations. The structural controls imposed by the New York courts are making it much harder for Trump to engage in the kind of financial maneuvering that the suspicious activity reports suggest has been going on for years. With a monitor watching every significant transaction and court approval required for major financial decisions, Trump simply cannot move money around without leaving a trail that prosecutors can follow. This is the kind of oversight that makes it nearly impossible to hide assets or engage in money laundering, because every attempt to do so must be documented and approved, and the monitor is specifically charged with reporting suspicious activity. The New York courts have effectively created a financial prison for Trump, one that will be very difficult to escape. The bank situation is another dimension of Trump's financial crisis that deserves closer examination, because the decision of major financial institutions to cut ties with him is not just an inconvenience, it's a fundamental threat to his ability to operate. Banks are the circulatory system of the modern economy, and when you are cut off from them, you cannot easily move money, access credit, or conduct the normal transactions that businesses require. Trump's claim that he can simply find alternative lenders ignores the reality that alternative lenders are more expensive, less reliable, and more likely to have legal problems of their own. The people who are willing to do business with someone under federal investigation are not necessarily the kind of people who will help Trump stay on the right side of the law. Trump's desperate legal strategy of suing the IRS and Treasury Department for $10 billion is a transparent attempt to intimidate the very agencies that are investigating him, and it's a strategy that is almost certainly doomed to fail. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has already deferred the matter to the Justice Department, effectively saying that the Trump administration will not intervene to settle the lawsuit or make it go away. This means that Trump will have to litigate against the IRS and Treasury, while those same agencies are building criminal cases against him, a situation that creates enormous conflicts of interest and gives prosecutors additional evidence of Trump's attempts to obstruct justice. The lawsuit is not going to stop the investigations, and it may well make things worse. The IRS criminal investigation cases represent the most serious legal threat Trump has ever faced because they are criminal investigations with the power to compel testimony and subpoena documents, and they are being conducted under grand jury authority that allows prosecutors to build cases in secret without revealing their evidence to the targets of their investigation. Grand jury proceedings are one-sided affairs where prosecutors present evidence and witnesses testify without the target of the investigation being present to challenge the evidence or cross-examine witnesses. This gives prosecutors enormous power to build cases and to pressure witnesses to cooperate, and it's a process that has resulted in the indictment of countless defendants who believed they were untouchable. The amount of money involved in the suspicious transfers is itself a powerful piece of evidence for prosecutors, because $284 million is not a small amount that could be explained by ordinary business transactions. This is a massive flow of money that Treasury investigators have identified as suspicious, and the pattern of the transfers shows classic money laundering characteristics that are difficult to explain away. The transfers to Cayman shell companies, the timing immediately after legal judgments, the structuring to avoid reporting thresholds, all of these are signs of criminal conduct that prosecutors will use to build their case. The sheer volume of the transfers makes it difficult for Trump to claim that these were innocent mistakes or routine business transactions. The potential for federal prosecution is what makes this situation so dangerous for Trump because money laundering charges carry serious penalties. A conviction for money laundering can result in decades of imprisonment, and the forfeiture provisions of the money laundering statutes allow prosecutors to seize assets that were involved in or derived from the illegal conduct. This means that Trump could not only face prison time, he could also lose the very properties and businesses that he has spent his life building. The financial investigations are not just about money. They are about the possibility of dismantling Trump's entire economic empire and sending him to prison for the rest of his life. The New York court controls are making it increasingly difficult for Trump to prepare for this potential prosecution because the Monitor and Compliance Director are watching his financial moves and reporting suspicious activity to the court and to law enforcement. Trump cannot simply move money to offshore accounts or create new shell companies to hide assets because every significant financial transaction requires approval and oversight. The court-ordered monitors are essentially financial watchdogs with teeth, and they are making it nearly impossible for Trump to engage in the kind of financial maneuvering that the suspicious activity reports suggest have been his standard operating procedure for years. The convergence of these pressures is creating a situation where Trump's options are rapidly narrowing, and his desperation is likely to increase accordingly. The investigations are continuing, the scrutiny is intensifying, and Trump's attempts to fight back through lawsuits and intimidation are not working. The banks are not coming back, the courts are not backing down, and the federal investigators are not stopping their work. Trump is trapped in a financial vice that is tightening around him with every passing day. And the more desperate he becomes, the more likely he is to engage in additional illegal conduct that will only make his situation worse. The political implications of Trump's financial crisis are also becoming more significant because the investigations are occurring while Trump is running for re-election and trying to convince voters that he is the best person to manage the economy. The contrast between Trump's public persona as a successful businessman and his actual situation as a defendant in multiple financial investigations is becoming impossible to ignore, and that contrast is undermining his credibility with the voters who are most likely to decide the outcome of the election. The more the investigations reveal about Trump's financial conduct, the harder it becomes for him to maintain the fiction that he is a brilliant businessman who can be trusted with the nation's finances. The suspicious activity reports are particularly damaging to Trump's public image because they describe specific transactions in detail, not general allegations or political accusations. When voters hear that Treasury investigators have identified classic money laundering patterns in Trump Organization transfers, they are more likely to believe that Trump has engaged in criminal conduct than if they were hearing generic accusations from political opponents. The specificity of the reports makes them more credible and more damaging, and the fact that they are official government documents means they cannot be dismissed as partisan attacks. The reports are a powerful piece of evidence that Trump has been engaged in financial misconduct, and they are undermining his political support in ways that are difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. The legal jeopardy Trump faces from the financial investigations is also more serious than the political challenges he has faced in the past, because the criminal justice system operates differently from the political system. In politics, Trump has been able to use his power, his wealth, and his media connections to fight back against his opponents. But in the criminal justice system, those tools are less effective. Prosecutors have powers that political opponents do not have, including the power to compel testimony, to issue subpoenas, and to bring charges that cannot be simply litigated away in the court of public opinion. When federal prosecutors come after you, they have the resources and the authority to build a case that can be difficult to defeat, even for someone as wealthy and powerful as Trump. The New York court controls are also making it more difficult for Trump to use his political power to fight back against the investigations, because the monitors and compliance directors are independent actors who do not answer to Trump and are not subject to his influence. These are court-appointed officials whose job is to oversee Trump's finances and report any suspicious activity to the authorities, and they cannot be fired or intimidated by the president. This means that Trump's usual tactics of attacking his opponents and trying to intimidate them into backing down are not going to work here, because the monitors are not political opponents. They are legal professionals doing their jobs. The court-appointed oversight is a structural constraint that Trump cannot evade, and it is making it much harder for him to engage in the kind of financial maneuvering that has apparently been his standard practice. The bank situation is similarly resistant to Trump's political power, because banks are private institutions that are guided by profit and risk management, not by political loyalty. When banks decide that doing business with Trump is too risky, they do not care about his political power or his ability to punish them. They are simply making a business judgment that the legal and reputational risks of doing business with him outweigh the potential profits. The bank's decision to cut ties with Trump is a powerful signal that his financial situation has become so toxic that even the most profit-driven institutions are unwilling to take the risk, and that signal is being heard by other potential business partners and lenders. The implications of all of this are clear and unmistakable. Trump's financial empire is under siege, and the siege is getting more intense with every passing day. The investigations are continuing, the constraints are tightening, the banks are refusing, and Trump's legal strategy of suing the investigators is not stopping any of it. The financial vice is closing around Trump, and his options for escape are rapidly disappearing. He cannot hide his assets. He cannot move money without approval. He cannot access credit from major banks, and he cannot stop the federal investigations that are building cases against him. Trump is trapped, and the trap is of his own making, the result of years of financial conduct that is now being exposed in the most damaging possible way. The question that everyone is asking is what happens next, and the answer is that the situation is likely to get worse for Trump before it gets better, because the investigations are still in their early stages and the evidence is still being collected. The IRS criminal investigation cases are likely to continue for months, if not years, as prosecutors gather documents, interview witnesses, and build their cases. The New York court controls are likely to remain in place for the foreseeable future, providing continuous oversight of Trump's financial operations and ensuring that any suspicious activity is reported to the authorities. And the banks are unlikely to return to doing business with Trump anytime soon, because the legal and reputational risks of doing so are simply too high. The possibility of federal prosecution is becoming more likely with every new revelation, because the evidence of financial misconduct is accumulating and the patterns are becoming clearer. The The suspicious activity reports document $284 million in potentially illegal transfers. The IRS criminal investigation is building cases under grand jury authority, and the New York court controls are providing real-time documentation of Trump's financial operations. This is the kind of evidence that prosecutors need to bring successful criminal cases, and the odds that they will use it to indict Trump are increasing every day. If Trump is indicted while in office, it would create an unprecedented constitutional crisis because no sitting president has ever faced criminal prosecution. The Justice Department has historically taken the position that a sitting president cannot be indicted, but that position is not enshrined in law and could be challenged in court. The Supreme Court has never definitively ruled on the question, and there is a strong argument that the president should not be immune from prosecution for crimes committed before or during their term of office. If federal prosecutors decide to bring charges against Trump, they would be entering uncharted legal territory, and the outcome would be uncertain for everyone involved. The constitutional implications of a presidential indictment are mind-boggling because there is no clear procedure for how to handle such a situation. Would Trump be required to step down pending trial? Would he be permitted to serve as president while defending himself against criminal charges? Could he pardon himself if convicted? These are questions that have never been answered, and they would be decided in the midst of a political and legal firestorm that would consume the entire country. The prospect of a criminal trial for a sitting president is so unprecedented that the legal system would have to create new procedures on the fly, and the uncertainty would be destabilizing for the entire political system. The prospect of conviction is even more alarming because a criminal conviction would be a devastating blow to Trump's presidency and his legacy. A conviction for money laundering would not only result in a prison sentence, it would also demonstrate conclusively that Trump has been engaged in criminal conduct while serving as president. The political fallout from such a conviction would be catastrophic, and it would almost certainly lead to calls for Trump's resignation or impeachment. The conviction of a sitting president for financial crimes would be the most damaging political event in American history, and the consequences would be felt for generations. The financial penalties that Trump could face are also staggering because the money laundering statutes include forfeiture provisions that allow the government to seize assets involved in or derived from the illegal conduct. This means that Trump could lose not only his freedom, but also his property, his businesses, and his financial empire. The buildings that he has spent decades building, the golf courses where the wealthy gather, the brand that he has cultivated so carefully, all of it could be taken away by the government if he is convicted of money laundering. The financial consequences of conviction would be as devastating as the legal consequences, and they would destroy everything Trump has built over his lifetime. The political pressures on Trump are also likely to intensify as the financial investigations continue, because every new revelation about his conduct is a fresh blow to his credibility and his political support. The voters who have been willing to overlook his scandals and controversies may find it harder to ignore the evidence of criminal financial conduct, and the swing voters who are necessary for electoral victory are likely to be particularly troubled by the allegations of money laundering. The financial investigations are undermining Trump's political position in a way that no other controversy has managed to do, because they go to the heart of his claim to be a successful businessman who can be trusted with the nation's finances. Trump's response to the investigations is likely to become increasingly desperate and increasingly aggressive as the pressure mounts, because he is running out of options and running out of time. The lawsuit against the IRS and Treasury Department is only the beginning, and there will be many more such attempts to intimidate and obstruct the investigators who are closing in on him. The danger is that Trump will go too far in his efforts to stop the investigations, engaging in conduct that is itself criminal, and that gives prosecutors additional grounds for prosecution. A desperate man is a dangerous man, and Trump is becoming more desperate with every passing day. The media coverage of Trump's financial crisis is also likely to intensify because the story of a sitting president under criminal investigation for money laundering is one that cannot be ignored. Every new revelation will be front-page news, every new filing will be analyzed and debated, and every new development will be a story that dominates the news cycle. The coverage is likely to be devastating for Trump because it will keep the allegations in the public eye and prevent him from changing the subject to more favorable topics. The media scrutiny is going to be relentless, and it is going to make Trump's political situation even more difficult. The legal community is also likely to weigh in on the investigations, with experts offering their opinions on the strength of the evidence and the likelihood of prosecution. The legal analysts are likely to be critical of Trump's legal strategy, noting that suing the agencies that are investigating you is a sign of desperation rather than strength. The conventional wisdom among legal experts is that Trump is in serious trouble and that his legal position is weakening with every new revelation. The weight of expert opinion is going to add to the pressure on Trump and make it harder for him to claim that he is the victim of a political witch hunt. The financial markets are also likely to react to the investigations because uncertainty about the president's financial situation and the possibility of prosecution is bad for business. The markets prefer predictability, and Trump's financial crisis is anything but predictable. The possibility of a presidential indictment, conviction, and imprisonment is the kind of uncertainty that makes investors nervous and leads to market volatility. The financial implications of the investigations extend beyond Trump himself, affecting the broader economy and creating additional pressure on the administration. The international dimension of Trump's financial crisis is also significant because foreign leaders are watching the investigations closely and drawing their own conclusions about Trump's ability to lead. The prospect of a criminal trial for an American president is alarming to America's allies, who rely on the United States for leadership and stability. The investigations are damaging America's image abroad and making it harder for Trump to conduct foreign policy effectively. The international pressure is another factor that is likely to make Trump's situation worse, because it reduces his ability to claim that he is the victim of partisan attacks and forces him to confront the reality of his legal jeopardy. The ultimate outcome of Trump's financial crisis remains uncertain because so much depends on the evidence that the investigations uncover and the decisions that prosecutors make. But the trend is clear and unmistakable. The investigations are intensifying, the constraints are tightening, the pressures are mounting, and Trump's options are narrowing. The financial vice is closing around him, and it is only a matter of time before it snaps shut. The question is not whether Trump will face consequences for his financial conduct, but what those consequences will be and how severe they will be. The answer is likely to be more devastating than anyone can currently imagine. The legacy of Trump's presidency is already being written, and it is being written in the investigative files of the Treasury Department, the grand jury minutes of IRS criminal investigations, and the orders of New York courts. The story of Trump's financial conduct is not yet complete, but the outlines are becoming clear, and the picture is not pretty. The empire that Trump built through decades of financial maneuvering is now under assault from the very authorities he has spent his life trying to avoid, and the consequences of that assault are likely to be devastating for Trump, his family, and his businesses. The financial investigations represent the most serious threat Trump has ever faced, and they are the threat that is most likely to finally bring him down. The financial system has turned against Trump in a way that no political opponent ever could, because the financial system is not subject to his power or his influence. The Treasury Department, the IRS, the New York courts, the major banks, all of them are part of a financial infrastructure that Trump cannot control or intimidate. They are the instruments of a system that demands accountability from everyone, including presidents, and they are now demanding accountability from Trump. The financial system is not going to stop until the truth is known and justice is done, and that truth is likely to be devastating for Trump. This is not politics. It is accounting, and the numbers are not in Trump's favor.